it's a rough world outlook, and that's going to tend to constrain our sentiment. And if it doesn't constrain our confidence about ourselves and the economy over the next year, it's going to definitely do what it's been doing for the past 3 to 4 years, and that's to make us think 2, 5, a dozen times before we act on our confidence and buy capital goods, consumer goods, and hire people. Because this is where a lot of analysts have got themselves completely bamboozled over the past couple of years in New Zealand. They have looked at the sentiment measures that you and I give in consumer and business surveys. The sentiment measures have been and still are high. And in the past, pre-GFC, when you see a sentiment measure up there, you know it means your economy is going to grow 4 to 5%. If those relationships held. And you even look underneath that, and when businesses are asked, okay, you're happy, are you going to hire people? Yes. Are you going to invest? Yes. But then when you get down to actually investing and hiring, that's where we stop. That's where we balk. That's where we go, I want to do this, I can afford to do it, but I'm just going to wait to see what happens overseas or whatever. And that, of course, is the dominant thing sweeping through the economy right now. There's a massive excuse for just waiting a little bit longer. On top of myself for the past 18 months saying, if I was in retailing, then I think my optimal strategy would be plan to miss the first 3 months of the spending surge when it comes. That following that strategy is a hell of a lot better than trying to pick a time when the surge will come and building up inventories for it. This one can easily catch you out. Whereas if you're doing a bit of a scramble further on, I think that's the policy of least regret. And that's sort of how we sometimes have to look at some of our decisions, in this sort of environment. What generates for me the least regret, as it were. So it's a bit wimpish, I know, especially in light of one of the things I'll say in a few minutes regarding the labour market. Anyway, we've only grown by 1.1% in the past year in New Zealand. We thought it was a wonderful 1.4%, which sounds good overseas. When I was in Europe, I'd say I've got sort of good news and bad news about New Zealand economy. The bad news is we only grew 1.4% last year, and I watched them and they sort of get it. The good news is we grew 1.4% last year compared with, back in a recession in the UK, etc. Actually, the numbers just got revised. We actually didn't accelerate from 1.2% in 2010 to 1.4% last year. We slowed down from a revised 1.5% in 2010 to 1.1% last year. Even with all the spending we did, 500,000 TVs, etc., associated with the Rugby World Cup. So we've sort of had that stimulus and didn't really amount to much. I think the whole thing sort of fizzed out like the final game there. Yeah, 1 point difference, low scoring, but it was sort of boring, wasn't it? So, heck, victory's a victory. On the home soil, yeah, okay, it's sort of half a victory. But never mind, I just don't watch rugby. I've watched one game in 6 years, that was it, and I'll give another go in 6 years' time, shall we say. Anyway, so where we're looking at here, we have chugged along with very weak growth in New Zealand over this last 3 years because we've been concerned about events overseas, because the currency's been relatively high as well, because we ourselves have been deleveraging. Now, I use the term deleveraging as opposed to paying down our debt. Now, this is what many people have done overseas. They have got down the nominal level of their debt by 5 to 10% for households in the UK and the US, etc. Not us Kiwis. No. We haven't sort of been shocked by these sort of events. We see things overseas and we go, these are shocking events, but we don't feel it. We felt pain and fear when we embraced the reforms in the 1980s and the early 1990s in New Zealand, but we don't feel that. We sit back and feel quite chuffed that the Chinese need to buy our stuff for the next few centuries or the millennia that they're operating on, so we're away laughing there. We're quite chuffed that we went into the global financial crisis with the banks already having sort of had the shit kicked out of them back in the late 80s and early 90s, and so we didn't see the bad lending. And the government here having run surpluses for 14 years and debt only at 24% of GDP, not Europe's, 87%, that sort of thing. So we don't feel the pain, the sense of crisis, etc., that they have overseas. Now, where did that come from? I think I was going to give an outlook on something. So we're not panicking about anything generally. It was going to be, why haven't we spent up over the past 3 years? Because we have deleveraged, meaning instead of our household debt going up by 10% per annum leading into 2008, it's been going up just 1% per annum over about each of the last 3 years. Yes, the ratio of household debt to income has improved. That's the deleveraging. Our ratio has gone from a truly vomitable 155% to a truly sickening 141% ratio of household debt to income. This is not a pretty sight at all. Our household savings rate, you will have seen articles of household savings are growing in New Zealand. Well, technically, yes. Our household savings rate 6 years ago was minus 9%. In the year to March 2011, the latest data, it was plus 0.2%. So yes, we've made a big change. To me, no. Structurally, one of the vulnerabilities in our economy is still this high level of external private sector household-related debt, which I think will manifest itself in 3 to 5 years' time, probably as another credit rating downgrade from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, etc. Not now, but probably a wee bit further down the track. Now, as we go forward then over the next couple of years, if it wasn't for one thing, I'd basically be up here saying I think we continue with the growth rate we've been having the past couple of years of 1 to 1.5% per annum. And so I would, and I do, talk about the growth support we get from catch-up house construction in Auckland. I have had this very different view on the housing market from other economists since late 2004. My analysis has been based around you cannot get yourself a builder, electrician, plasterer. We did not enter the global crisis with a housing construction boom, with an oversupply. If anything, we went in with aggregate a wee undersupply. And that's why house prices kept rising from 04 to 07, and the Reserve Bank had to take the cash rate from 4.5% to 8.25% because we had a shortage and we're naturally bidding the prices up. And that's why I said, sort of in late 08, I think our house prices fall, not the 40% as some people are saying, they've never done Eco 101 at all, but only 10 to 15%. They went down 11, and now we're back where we were at late 07. So that was sort of the broad bit I've been saying about our housing market in terms of, yes, I would be happy to buy an investment property if that was the thing that I was interested in. But then there's another aspect of it as well, and that is that the housing cycle in New Zealand in the 1990s was led by Auckland in terms of the migration rule changes in the early 1990s, influx of migrants into Auckland, and so everything boomed up here, the investors are active up here, construction turnover, prices, etc. The cycle for the 2000s was led by the regions. 5 years, low currency, booming rural incomes, and so natural sort of growth and activity out there, and investors looking for better yield than they were getting in Auckland. And the example I would always give would be going out to Otorohanga, for instance, and not only buying, but doing some building. So there's an oversupply, first of all, of coastal sections, might last a decade or two, that particular one. Oversupply generally of property in the regions, but there's an undersupply in Auckland. And there will come a period of catch-up construction. And now it is starting, and it will be a good supporting factor for our economy. And in particular, what we have in operation now is not just general realisation the house prices aren't falling, they're rising, and yes, there's a shortage, maybe I want to do something about that. What you also have is this other phenomenon I've spoken about, the young people now entering the housing market, the household formation process. You see, they stopped doing that from 4 years ago when, never having had a mortgage, and they're seeing talk of Great Depression, they're wondering, I wonder if banks will lend on the security of houses ever again. If they do, I wonder what size of deposit I need. I'd better save one up. I don't know if I'm going to have a job in the very near future. And I see these forecasts of house prices falling 40%. I'd be a mug to buy, wouldn't I? And what you've had is this growing stack of young people sort of sitting at home, sitting on the couches as they do, ranked up there, sort of texting each other, this sort of thing. It's, whatever, it's a modern phenomenon, I suppose. And now they want to leave home, partly because the parents want to boot them out, one would suggest. But now you've got this big cohort of young people coming into the housing market. And I can almost see this explicitly in the monthly survey I've been doing for a year with the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand, where we ask agents a variety of questions. One is, are you seeing more or fewer young people in the market? And for the past few months, it's been more young people in the market. And I also ask, do you see more or fewer investors? And as of 3 to 4 months ago, that switched from fewer to more investors in the market now as well, who will be feeding in the same price range as the young people as well. And so that, of course, is going to drive construction. It's also going to create a pretty horrible socio-economic problem of poor housing affordability, people living in sleep-outs and garages. This is all coming back again. It's going to be quite a problem for the local authorities, predominantly here, a few other parts of the country, but whatever, that's something we need to keep an eye on. House construction, of course, in Auckland happening. We've got infrastructure happening. We've got dairy conversions going on as well. Electricity, not so much generation, the lines upgrade happening around the country. Irrigation schemes, there's a bit of stuff like that. There's also a feed-through of higher farm incomes into generalised spending to happen. Now, this is a really interesting one because the general economic cycle in New Zealand sort of is driven by that farming sector. Everything's bad eventually the cities go bad, and then the interest rates plummet, the exchange rates plummet, and everybody's feeling sad, saying last one out, turn the light off. We go through that sort of scenario. But the currency's low and the world economy recovers, the commodity prices go up, and the farmers cream it with lots and lots of money. And so they first of all reinitiate their fertiliser application program. So they do that, they pay down some debt, they maybe shout themselves a new tractor or that sort of thing. And if the incomes are still good, then they sort of sit back and go, well, you know, this is proven okay, this farming. As a sheep and beef farmer, I'm making my first taxable profit in 10 years sort of scenario. How do I grow my wealth as a farmer? That's right, I get whatever animal I'm interested in because I like sheep over cows or whatever, but I get as much land as I can and I squat on it as long as I can and make tax-free capital gain averaging 10% per annum. And so the farmers then enter the phase where they are right now of trying to buy each other's farms. And so you've got farm sales running 50, 70% ahead of a year earlier. And of course the farmers, this is their most interesting period because in surveys, etc., they'll be saying, oh, land prices are too high, I feel unhappy about everything. They want everybody else to be depressed so they can go and buy the land. So this is where we are. This is where we are at the moment. The next phase, as a macroeconomist that I'm interested in, is when they go, I'm feeling even better now, give me the XR rate, I'm going to get a caravan, I'm going to get the Papamar Beach holiday home, I'm going to replace all the whiteware in the kitchen, and I'm going to get an iPaddy, potty sort of things all throughout the house, and so there's a big stimulus to the cities come along. Well, you know, the bugger of this is that it's taken so long for the farmers to reach that point that the commodity price cycle has peaked. And commodity prices on average are 15-20% below their peaks. The dairy prices, Fonterra's in a fortnightly auction there, are down 41% of their levels a year ago. And the dairy payout, which was $8.25 of 2 years ago, maybe $6.30 this year, it's going to be $5 something next year. And so the stimulus that was going to flow through, it's going to be smaller and even more delayed than we were thinking as well. So that just sort of knocks back a bit of the economic growth. But obviously the clear thing to throw in there that says we have capacity to maybe grow 2% over the next 12, 24 months, etc., maybe approaching 2.5% to 3% if we're really lucky, is the Christchurch rebuild. There's a lot of residential, non-residential construction to be undertaken there. And in the past 3 months, the number of consents issued for new houses in Auckland, up about 26% on a year ago. The number for Christchurch, up about 100% on a year ago. So these sort of things are happening, but we're not going to get the truly big surge until the insurance becomes available. And we assume, and that's all this is what you learn to do through 5 years of studying economics at varsity. You assume stuff, assume problems away, you assume the world doesn't change, etc. We assume that if there's no big aftershock in Christchurch come the end of June, the insurance will be available. And then we banks will lend on the security of the house and kaboom, she's all go. Well, hopefully that is going to be the case, but we assume it is going to be the case from the start of next year, and that's going to give some good support for growth in the New Zealand economy. So depressing as sometimes I may standing up here or reading my weekly overview tonight, if you receive that and you look on the front page and then there's just one word entitling the first section there, bad. It's not a reference to Michael Jackson, and in that case it would be dead, you know, this sort of thing. It's just bad outlook for overseas, for Europe, but keep reading in there. There is some sort of good stuff as well. China, not so bad. The US, not so bad. And even Australia, sort of not so bad. But it's just unrealistic to expect there's going to be a growth surge in our economy in the very near future. And on that basis, you know, the Reserve Bank just isn't going to be raising interest rates for a while. Will they cut in the near future? I'm not confident of that. I don't think they need to in order to support the economy. We've already got a round of interest rate cuts going through the market at the moment. Because the markets think they're going to cut, our funding costs for short-term borrowing money, not floating, but 6, 12, 18-month fixed, they've dropped away because the markets have priced in a cut from the Reserve Bank in the very near future. And so we've already passed that on with the discounting of either the 12-month rates or in the case of the best rate out there, that's the BNZ's 5.1% rate for 18 months. And for your guide in my section in my weekly tonight, if I were a borrower, what would I do? That is what I would now do. I would go for the 18-month fixed at 5.1%. It's an exceedingly good rate, and then just hoe into that principle, as much as you can. I just want to make a mention on the labour market. We've had 4 years, tight labour market conditions, a lot of people not doing apprenticeships, a lot of people not getting trained generally, a lot of people going across to Australia. We're going to run out of people relatively quickly when the labour market does pick up. And at the moment, unemployment rate is 6.7%, and the labour market is officially loose, as it were. But I have a theory at some point next year, It could tighten up relatively quickly, especially because, if you followed the policy of, I'm going to miss the first bit of the upturn because I've been planning for upturns for 3 years now and every single one of them has fizzled out. So you could face some sort of scrambling around for people situation at some point next year. That has a number of implications. Number one, you're going to have to be thinking about recruitment offshore. Past 15 years, New Zealand's labour force grew 29%. Next 15 years, it only grows 11%. These demographics don't change much on you. And so naturally the labour market from a long-term point of view is going to be tightening up, especially predominantly as the older people leave. You need to think, what is my offshore recruitment strategy? Get yourself sort of a bit of a relationship built up with an HR firm there. You also just have to sit back and think, okay, I guess there's a limit to how far I can screw down the staff as well. We're sort of reaching the point of 4 years down the track where people are starting to feel that the bosses are just taking the piss, quite frankly, with the cutbacks on wages and conditions. And so the plans are being built up, the dreams in people's minds. There's the Schwarzenegger reach in, grab the heart and rip it out sort of thing from the boss, that one might have. And then there's a more realistic one of, as soon as anybody shows the slightest interest in me, I'm out of here. And the risk is that people do what they did in 05 to 07, get the big wage increases, not by going up to the boss and saying, give me another 20%, but by leaving and going somewhere else. We could face quite a surge in staff churn in 2013 into 14, because it's part of our characteristic. We don't generally sort of bargain as individuals for higher wages. We'd rather sort of just leave on nice terms and try and get the higher wage and better conditions sort of somewhere else. So that labour market dynamic will become interesting, I think, maybe 12, 15 months' time.